So now we've done a little bit of an introduction to appraisals. We understand where they're used. We have statutory reasons, we have market reasons, and we understand that the purpose is to determine a value. And we talked a little bit about what value means. Remember, subjective measures and objective measures. At the beginning, we also talked about a clear distinction between an appraisal and an assessment. And there's a couple other pieces of terminology that I want to make sure you understand what the distinction between them is. And that's selling price and market value. The selling price of a home, a lot of times, is a good indicator for what its market value is. But sometimes the selling price moves off of its true market value. So what's doing this? How can we create this disconnect between the selling price of a home and its true market value? Well, let's think about this. How do you perhaps get a home for less than its true market value? How could you get a quote-unquote deal on a property? Well, imagine if the seller was in a rush. If the seller had to liquidate this home, perhaps because they have financial problems, or they've bought another home, or they're going through a divorce or a bankruptcy, there's a host of reasons. But if the seller needs to get rid of the home quickly, they might be willing to accept less than its true market value. Well, where could somebody pay more for a home? Well, we've seen it a lot. What happens if there's a bidding war on a property? So a lot of interested buyers want this particular property, and it drives up the selling price of that home. It doesn't change the entire market. It doesn't affect the whole neighborhood. But that particular home was able to get a bidding war. How do we get bidding wars? Good advertising, strong marketing. So you future realtors, you'll want to get as many eyes on the property as possible. And the more eyes, the more visits, the more offers, the higher we expect the selling price to go. But that's because of your efforts. It doesn't change the market. Another reason somebody might be willing to pay more for a home is they really need that property, what we call a special purchaser, someone who has a specific interest in that property or properties. We see this a lot as well in what we call land assembly. Land assembly, in case you don't know, is where a developer is looking for 8, 10, 12, 20 lots because they want to build a townhouse complex or an apartment complex, and they need a number of lots that are adjoining. They can't do it with any random lots. So because they need 8, 10, or 12 adjoining lots, they're probably willing to pay more than the fair market value of each individual lot to make sure their project moves forward. We say it extends the range of bids. By having them be a special purchaser, they're willing to extend what they would normally put on such a property. A lot of times you will see also sales between family members, what we call related parties. Sometimes the grandparents sell the home to the grandchildren just for estate planning, tax planning purposes. And because of that, they might not do it at its full fair market value, perhaps lower, perhaps higher, just to not trigger or control whatever taxes might come out of it. So when we see a sale between related parties, that's another reason why selling price and market value can have this disconnect. Finally, imagine I'm selling my home. Well, traditionally, if you're the buyer, you'd go to RBC or BMO and get a loan, and maybe you'd get that loan at 6% interest. And then you'd pay back RBC monthly for the next 25 years. But if I told you, instead of paying RBC back monthly for the next 25 years at 6%, pay me monthly 4%. I, the seller, will provide you the financing. It's what we call a vendor take-back arrangement. So at 4% interest, you are motivated to buy my property. And because the interest rate is lower, you're able to afford more. And it pushes up the selling price of the property. You're willing to pay a little bit more for the property because you're saving on the interest. But the flip can happen as well. I could charge you rates that are higher than the going market rate. Why would you do business with me if I'm charging you more than RBC? Maybe RBC turns you down. Maybe you can't get a traditional loan because you have bad credit or you're new to the country and have no credit at all. So in a vendor take-back financing arrangement, the seller is providing the financing to the buyer, which could be at lower than market rates, which would motivate you to pay more for the home, or higher than market rates, which would motivate you to pay less for the home. So all of these examples are reasons why we commonly see the selling price of a home disconnect from its true market value. Now, in most cases, an appraiser has to look at market value. So they have to understand if these things are going on behind the scenes. They are concerned with when market value changes. So then when does market value change? If these items that we talked about affect selling price, what affects market value? The market, supply and demand. Any item that affects supply and demand has an impact on market value. So as these items that affect either supply or demand or both change, then we'll see changes in market value. And the best example is probably interest rates. As interest rates rise, what happens? The demand in the market goes down because less people can afford to buy homes. So we expect home prices to drop. Now, they don't tank immediately. Why? Well, because the sellers pull their homes off the market, first of all, because they don't want to accept less for them. People don't panic because they have 5-year mortgages or 3-year term mortgages, so they have time to figure things out. So when we see changes in market value, they're typically slow changes, but they do happen. But we need supply and demand to be impacted. So supply could also be impacted by the cost of construction. If construction costs are going up, then developers will cut back on projects and wait until it's more profitable to build. So there'll be less supply on the market. With less supply on the market, there could be more demand, and you see a little bit of a balancing impact here. So we'll have things that affect supply and demand in the short term, like interest rates, and we'll have things that affect supply and demand in the long term, like construction costs or changing demographics, people moving into a community or out of a community. But the key is market value holds as long as supply and demand holds. And when supply and demand forces start to change, we expect to see either an increase or decrease in market value, but a slow change. So keep in mind this distinction then between the selling price of a home and its market value.